Let's see. There we go, the robot voice that tells us we're off. Okay, morning everybody. Thanks for being here. It's lovely to see so many of you. As I said, this is my last week at Striker Light, so this is slightly more last minute and chaotic. I've been relegated to an upstairs, not real meeting room. So I don't have a whiteboard or a big screen. I've just got a sort of grab bag of post-it notes, which I will move close to the screen as and when they come into play. This is our session on pitching to non-arts attenders. So we're going to spend a little bit of time sharing some of our experiences and hopefully hearing from you as well about ways of talking about arts events and experiences that can help widen the pool of people who are interested in them, basically. So we're really talking about members of the public and audiences there. It's something that we've worked quite hard on at Striker Light over the last few years, and I think we're doing okay at. We sort of regularly get between about 45 and 55% of our audiences telling us that they are not arts attenders, and that's a pretty stark stat compared to some of the other sort of aggregated things that you see in the wider arts industry sometimes. The way I think I'm going to structure this, mostly because people don't tend to love being talked at for an hour and a half solid, which is the maximum time that we've got. We have to be out of here by 12:30. If we finish sooner, that's fine. I think I will try and do this in 3 broad sections, about 20 minutes each, and then we'll leave a bit of room for chat at the end of each of those, just so that we can break it up from the monotony of me. So I'll go through those 3. I've got them under these sort of big headlines here, which I'll bring close to the screen in a second. But the rest is like a grab bag of points. So I'll see which ones I feel like talking about when we get to it. But before we get to all of that, the one that you might be able to see on the wall, the big headline for all of this, whoop, there we go. If you take nothing else from this session, the only thing really you need to know about the secret to this, as far as I'm concerned, is you need to talk on their terms, on your target audience's terms, on your non-arts attenders' terms, on the terms of the people who you want to be there, not the terms of the people who are already going to be there, not the terms of you, not the terms of your artists, the terms and the manner and the interests of the people who you want to be in the room. And it's one of those things that's really simple to say, and it sort of sounds like teaching people to suck eggs, especially if you've worked in marketing for a while. But there's no getting away from those basics. That is the essential of it, and it's easy to say but much harder to do. And I think so. I've been working with Striker Light for a few years now, but I don't come from an arts marketing background, and it felt to me kind of from the get-go that it's a thing that the arts sector in particular has a weird blind spot to, or bad habit about, or is not well culturated to. It's like, it's marketing 101, talk on your audience's terms, but a lot of the arts marketing in particular, I see, really feels like it fails to do that thing right from the first hurdle, which is sort of surprising and interesting to me, and maybe we can talk a little bit about why that happens, and why is it that arts marketing in particular is so bad at getting on the terms of people other than itself. Maybe you disagree with me about that, but that's been my experience. But that's the top line takeaway, if nothing else. Talk on your audience's terms. Let me do 2 little intro bits, and then we'll get into my 3 sections. First one I just want to say a little headline thing about why this matters. And that is that enriching experiences of the sort that arts events hopefully are a form of soft power. They are part of how we sort of tell the difference between the haves and have-nots. It's part of what it means to have a good life. It's part of how the social disparities are encoded. There's a form of soft power, getting to have enriching experiences in your life. And so this stuff matters because actually, if you can break outside of the bubble of people who already come to this stuff and already get these experiences in their life, you're not just, strengthening your next NPO bid or diversifying your income streams or whatever. There's actually a form of social change, I think, that can happen here. That might sound grandiose, but I think it's a real thing, and we see that in our work in Gloucester. I think it might be slightly easier for us at Strike a Light to say, because we are a charity and we're a mission-led organisation, and part of our mission is to offer arts experiences to people who otherwise might not get to have them. But we see it happen at our events. It makes a difference to this city. It makes a difference to your city where you're working, who gets to be in the room for these things. And so I get quite animated about this stuff, because for me, it's not just a matter of, is this nice marketing or not? Like, have you done efficient conversion rate outreach or whatever? Ultimately, this comes down to, are we perpetuating privilege divides that already exist, or are we doing something to challenge them? So that's just my little pep talk to myself about why this is actually more of a big deal than it might sound like, changing the words on the copy to your next dance show or whatever it might be. And the other thing I think it's only fair to say, both for myself and everybody else in this work, is that what we're doing today, I think, is a necessary but not sufficient condition to making these changes. Like, I think it is hard to get non-arts attenders to come to arts events without changing something about how you talk about them, without making sure that you're speaking about those events on those people's terms. So I think you have to do this, but in itself, it won't solve the whole thing. It's not like if you start talking effectively to people in Greg's, then they'll all magically come to your events. There are lots of other things that have to be in place too, not least the what of what those events are, and the where. That is especially important, even the who. And part of what I mean by that is the channels by which this word gets out to people matters too. And a big part of why we've been able to get those bigger reaches into non-arts attender audiences at Strike a Light is the brilliant work of people like our community producers, people like Halima and Zarek, who we pay to be on staff, who are ordinary people of Gloucester, who are well connected into communities and parts of the city. And they do sterling work in taking this stuff out and putting it in front of the people who we want to have be there. Now, if we did that without changing the way we talked about it, then we might run into the same issue. But I know for sure that if we changed how we talked about it and didn't do that other work, then it would be moot. So those bits are just as important. Okay. Those are my little precursors. We'll do these 3 sections, and each of the sections comes with a little super easy, lo-fi, free, anyone can use it tool that you can start putting into practice straight away. Because I hate having to wait on training things for the good stuff. So I'm just going to give you probably my favorite tool right at the top here, and maybe we'll do a little exercise with it. But the first thing I want to talk about for more effective pitching to non-arts attenders is clarity. I think clarity is really important to people, and this is probably my biggest bugbear. I think arts marketing is real bad at it. Real bad. I think we almost make a virtue of avoiding clarity, and it drives me up the wall. So here is the tool to immediately rectify this. It's called the UpGoer 5 text editor, and it's one of my favorite things on the internet. I'm putting the link in the chat. I'm going to get you all to have a go at using it in a second. This is based on an XKCD comic where the artist tried to label and describe the Saturn V rocket, but using only the 1,000 commonest words in English. And it turns out 1,000 common words in English is not very many. It doesn't give you access to much fancy language. Most of what I've said on this call so far probably would not fit in the 1,000 commonest words. And so this text editor takes that same idea and flags up whether you are doing it or not. So you can type whatever you like into there, and it will give you a little red sort of spell check underline. that tells you if that word is outside the 1,000 commonest. And what this is really useful for in practice is forcing you to say exactly what you actually mean. Right? There's basically no adjectives in the 1,000 commonest words. You might be allowed like happy or something, I suppose. But it's a bit like trying to write a book for a 3-year-old or something, and it's an incredibly useful discipline, especially for people like me who've done an English degree and like the sound of their own voice and have a tendency to drift off into the loquacious. That's definitely not in the top 1,000. And it's a brilliant way of cutting through the sort of noise of your event and really getting down to what am I actually talking about here? What am I actually trying to say to people? It is really hard, as people are saying in the chat. It's really hard, but it's so useful because of that difficulty. That struggle that you're coming up against is exactly the healthy one, the healthy sort of wrangling that you should be doing if you want to tailor your pitches to a non-arts audience. So it's a dead simple tool, but I think as a starting point for forcing yourself outside of art speak, it's a really, really strong one. So let me just say a few bits about this, and then I'd love to open it up to the floor a little bit. So the reason that I'm on such a kick about clarity is partly this experience I had really early on at Strike a Light. Sold out to completely no tickets going to sold out again. One of the first shows I had to promote was an early years thing that we had coming up. And it was from a company that had been here previously the year before. And they come the year before and it sold out, and there were loads of like mums with their toddlers there, and it was a real big hit. And that's why we had them come back. They came back, we had their new show. We were talking about it in all the same places, and nobody was booking, nobody at all, like not a single ticket going. So this was an interesting puzzle. So I had a little look. I went and compared what we were saying about that year's show to the previous one to try and work out what the difference was. And this lesson, I felt like, stood me in good stead for all my years since, which was that the previous show described what was going to happen. Right, I think the first words were like step into. Now, even that's a little bit artsy, isn't it? But it literally meant step into. It meant like come inside a tent. And then it told you what would happen. This is what's going to play out in that time. This is how your kid's going to feel. This is how we're going to spend those 40 minutes or whatever it was together. That one sold out. This one, and I've just seen Daniel saying this in the comments, how are we supposed to sell theatre shows without using the word innovative? This new one fell into all those traps. It did all the art speak, and I'll elucidate a bit on what I mean by that in a second. But it didn't tell you what was going to happen. It had lots of very beautiful and, evocative adjectives and sort of things talking around the sort of vibe of what this might, but it didn't actually tell you what was going to happen. So we changed it. We just went in and we edited, our Facebook posts and whatever, and we rewrote it like the previous year's one, just a straightforward description of you'll come here, this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. And then it sold out in like 2 days. And it just was a really stark example, I think. I mean, I think early years shows of parents is a particularly pronounced example of that, but it was a really stark case of the difference that this can make. If you are trying to get people who don't normally come to arts events to come to your arts events, you have to be clear with them about what is going to happen. And just a little encouragement on that as well. I mean, this can be strategically difficult sometimes. It's one of the nice things about working at a small place like Strike a Light is I get more freedom to do this, but you can start over. You don't have to be beholden to what is provided to you from the company or the artist. I mean, the artist would be mortified if you were trying to meddle with what the actual work was, and that's fair enough, but you get the same rights going in the other direction. And guess what? The artist is already coming to your show because they're in it. So in a way, they're the last person who should be worrying about what you're using to describe this. You need to be talking on your audience's terms, right? And I think it is fair enough to be able to say, I still want to represent this show faithfully, but the things that you're saying about it are the things that sound good to you, and the things that we need to say about it are the things that are going to speak to the mums of the Matson estate who don't know what they're going to do with their Tuesday morning. Headline: stop talking to yourself on your audience's terms. Artists and arts organizations are really good at talking to other artists and arts organizations. You can, I'm sure, I've seen loads of shows and brochures that are absolute catnip to people with their gold Adidas trainers and their trendy Bristol fringes, and I'm allowed to say that because I live in Bristol, who are going to go to it anyway. They're going to go to it anyway. And we're great at using the language that speaks to ourselves, but that's not who we're interested in. So stop talking to yourself. Here's a really specific one. This is a good advice for the Upgoer 5 editor as well. More nouns, less adjectives. Tell me concretely what this is. You know, I'm not sitting on a, you know, a sturdy green reclining receptacle. It's a chair, right? Like, just describe what your thing actually is. And if that starts to feel scary and like, well, then it doesn't sound good if I start describing what it actually is, then that's some interesting pushback to go up the chain with. Like, why is it that once you can't hide behind mellifluous adjectives, you suddenly feel less confident in your offer? Don't hide the meat. This is a similar thing, but art speak has a terrible tendency of putting all the substantive stuff at the end of the sentence, right? You put all the uninteresting, waffly bits at the start as you sort of ramp up, and then you hide all the meaningful bits at the end. So and so and so and so present, created by Thing, made in the history of blah, taking a journey to blah. It doesn't actually tell me what it is until I'm 27 words in. Put the bit that it is at the start, and then just delete the rest anyway. Say what's going to happen. That was my lesson from that early years show. Especially for non-arts attenders. This goes for anyone going to anything new. If you've ever tried, like if a friend has tried to get you to go wild swimming with them for the first time, or taking you to a betting shop or whatever, if you're trying to do anything for the first time, you'll know that it is scary while it is opaque to you. And the more that somebody can give you a pre-vision of what is going to happen, the more confident you feel able to do it, you know, to actually step into that. So spell it out for people. We found that this really massively helps. Like, yeah, if you can even give them a schedule of how that time is going to be spent, gives people confidence to do something new. Think about your information hierarchy. Learn to use the sentence, no one cares. People quite often think that I'm a bit fractious and difficult, but then afterwards they like it because it makes it better. And one of those things is telling them that no one cares. And I don't think it's a bad thing to recognize which bits of information are salient and connect to the people you're trying to reach and which don't. So we, for example, do a lot of contemporary theatre that's often with smaller companies. Like, ours is not going to have anyone that anyone has heard of in it, or be made by anyone that has ever heard of, right? That's not the type of events that we're having. So functionally, no one who doesn't already know who all these people are cares about your company logos, for example. And I know this causes all sorts of issues every time. But if you try and start with like who the producing companies are and their logos and like the whole creative backstory of this project, it doesn't mean anything to people who aren't already in that space. So recognize that the information hierarchy on their terms is different. The mums want to know if they can park their buggies somewhere. They don't care who the creative assistant director was. That doesn't mean you don't have to give credit and say those things somewhere, but, you know, choose what's going first. Oh, and really tiny detail, this is just a good writing thing in general. No passive voice. Like, use active sentences where you say who is doing what to whom, when. Don't hide behind these, like, yeah, long, wafty sentences. Anyway, there you go. There's a little packet on ArtSpeak. I could talk about it all day. I've got a little folder of examples on my computer of people who've done it terribly, but I won't publicly name and shame right now. they drive me up the wall, and they are a death knell for trying to reach new audiences. So stop doing it, and use the Upgo 5 to stop you doing it. Lisa, that's a really good question in the chat. Let me speak to that momentarily, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, they can. Any recommendations on how to begin these conversations with artists who might be really stuck to their copy? That is a great practical question, and one that we have definitely run up against. Again, I think I have to hold my hands up and say my first answer to that is kudos to Strike a Light for being a brilliant organization to work for. One of the nice things about being a small organization is you can have these conversations amongst yourselves more quickly, and there was quickly a lot of trust given to me, and I really appreciate that from the artistic directors and the exec directors, who are having the conversations with the artists. So the rest of your team matters a lot in that. The only other thing I say is I suppose it gets easier the more precedent that you've got for this, right? So it's the first time you have that conversation is probably the hardest, because it feels like your word against theirs. You're trying to say, I know what I'm doing. I need to describe it this way if you want people to come. And they're saying, yeah, but I know what my work is, and don't you dare tinker with it. And then it just feels like one person's word against another. As you are able to evidence the results of your changes, it gets easier generally to have those conversations. Not saying it happens every time, but if you can point to, look, everywhere else you've taken this to on tour, you've had 10% new audiences, and all of our last 5 things we've done, we've had 50% new audiences. So we know we're doing something right. Anything you can do to expose people to the rationale, there's this sort of reputation of artists being quite precious, but a lot of them actually are very empathetic and open to reason. Like, we've literally taken people around Gloucester and shown them the places that we're going to be putting these events on, and like the social context into which it's coming, and then people can track with your reasons for wanting to make these changes. But yeah, also some of that comes down to like decisions that might be out of your hand, like programming decisions. There's going to be some artists and companies that are more open to that than others, and sometimes you might just end up stuck with some who are very stubborn. Sometimes you've got to play the hand you're dealt. Yes, and Jack, I think that comment in the chat is very apt as well. The influence of the technical way that artists have to speak to funders. And yeah, my hunch is, in general, I think there is a real force of habituation across all of this. And that's partly because of everything being so stretched. So both for artists and for marketing teams, it's all people who are like up to their eyeballs, right? And there's no time to take a step back. And so that makes it much harder to get out of your established habits. So if you're in a habit of doing it this way, you're just going to do it again. If the quickest thing is to take the copy you've been sent and just copy paste it in, this is what you're going to do. If the quickest thing is to look at the brochure from the RSC and just do something that sounds sort of similar, that's what you're going to do for the sake of time. And again, that's a luxury that I've been afforded at Strike a Light, is we've made the choice to be slower and more careful with our events. So one thing we do is we have an event design meeting with the whole team before every event that we do. So all like 9 of us sit around the table, and the first question in this event design meeting is, what is it? In concrete, what is this thing, and why would anybody care? And actually the chance to like break those things down, thrash them out, deconstruct it a bit, and then see if you want to put it back together in a different information hierarchy, a different permutation, is incredibly valuable for the work that we're doing. It's really helpful in reaching those new audiences, but I recognize that not everybody has the luxury of that space. Last bit of advice on that, and then if anyone else wants to jump in on a comment, they can. The other thing I'd say on that is, that means that if you can build the habit of talking to new audiences, then at least you get into that cycle in a virtuous way, right? Then at least the track that you're already running on is talking to normal people, non-arts attenders. And we'll come on to this in a bit, but things like just going into your local shopping centre and trying to talk to people behind the counter in Costa or Greggs is a great way of getting in a habit of breaking out of art speak. Length is a really big deal. Even things like the layout of websites. I see so many that are like these full width, like big stretch things where the sentence literally runs really long on the screen. And again, it's a really good discipline to get into, like, can I try and get a full stop in every 12 words or so? You know, like, can I squidge this down? What does it look like on a phone? That's going to be how most people are reading it. These things sort of all sit really well together. And again, it's a habituation thing. And it's often easier to write. I'm doing it now in my speech, right? This is my natural speech. It's easier to talk long and talk with big words and go all around the houses. But if you can get into the habit of short, snappy, like nothing there that's not serving a function, it's a really, really good discipline. Yeah, I think that's that comment about reading your copy aloud is a good one as well. Although, you know, if you're a performance poet, you'd probably find a way of reading out a 400-word sentence with beautiful pauses and enjambment organically. So again, it's all about habits. Great. I'm conscious that time is running on, so let's rattle through some more of these. My second headline, this is really the biggest one, I think, but it's also the one that is most out of our hands as marketers sometimes. Service. This is proper marketing 101 stuff. Literally, this comes straight out of the original book on advertising by Claude Hopkins, My Life in Advertising. His headline on what makes for a good advert in 1830, and still true today, I would say, is service. What does this give the people who you are talking to? What do they get out of it? Who are they and what's in it for them? I've made a whole career out of those two questions. You can have that for free. And what do they get out of this? Why should they be there? And it is staggering to me how little this question gets asked in the arts. You would think that it would be the very first thing. But I've had conversations with artists and companies where I say to them, what do the people come and get out of this? And they sort of look at me like, that's a baffling thought that's never crossed their mind. Anyway, my tool for this is personas, or, and we've talked about this already, actually go to Greg's. There's no substitute for it. Personas, it's easier to talk to one person than to talk to an abstract conceptual monolith, like one of those like audience segmentation blocks or whatever. And so a persona is like imagining an archetypal example of who you want to be talking to with this event, you know, and literally give them a name, build a little pen picture of them, and sort of get to know them in your head. You know, who do I want to come to this? I want it to be Marie. She's a 42-year-old single mum of a 6-year-old who lives in a flat on the Matson estate and normally spends her weekends, you know, like build out a little pen picture. Now, sure, there's going to be a little bit of a risk of like stereotype or broad brushing or generalization in there. But I still think it gets you closer to actually engaging with real humans out there in the world than sitting at your desk and looking at stats on a spreadsheet about audience segments. And it's just easier to write to one person, right? So you're not writing your copy for the website or for the brochure or for the billboard. You're writing it for Marie. You're writing it to Marie. And again, this will help with some of that like brevity and clarity stuff that we've already talked about. And so, yeah, I find personas a really valuable tool for sort of holding myself accountable to, am I talking to myself or am I talking to the person who I want to be there? And the best version of this, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Again, I recognize not everyone always has the luxury of this, is actually go talk to those people for real, like not a hypothetical version of them. Go look them in the face and do your pitch to them. There is no faster way of finding out whether you're saying something of interest to non-arts attenders than to be saying it to their face while they're busy. And we found this out. We had an event a few weeks ago that was going up in a place called King Square at the end of a shopping centre here in the middle of Gloucester. And I took one of our 4 interns and I dragged them around the shops with me. And we had to go into all of the staff of those shops and try and explain what this big pop-up thing that was going to be happening outside their shopping arcade was going to be. And I tell you, there's no quicker way to hone your public-facing pitch than to stand there in the queue at H&M or Nero's or whatever it is and try and say something to somebody and watch them actively zoning out in front of your face. So if you can, like, go and practice pitching your event or your show or your experience to another real-life human who is in your target audience. Again, big shout out to our community producers here. They are brilliant at being part of that voice for us as a whole organization and coming in and being like, I don't get it. I don't know what this is. I don't care about that bit. But yeah, it's not hard to tell when you're looking somebody in the eye whether you've got their interest or not. That's a bold thing to say on a Zoom with 20 people looking at you where you're doing all the talking, but sure. Right, let's see if we can rattle through some of these post-its. I think a lot of these will start doubling up. You will find quickly, if you're trying to get to the bottom of the service, that words lead back to strategy. And I've found this in 20 years of doing marketing, even back at the software company where I started out. We used to build the website for the product first, not because we were trying to sell something that didn't exist, but because how you would pitch it informed what you wanted the software to be and to do. And you'll find the same with shows. And exactly as Daniel's example with the upgoer there, you'll start finding that actually, when you boil this down to its simplest version, like you want to change the hierarchy of what the thing actually is, not just of the information of how you're talking about it. So just a word of warning there, you may find that if you really get into this habit of starting with what is on other people's terms, on your audience's terms, you may find it starts pushing back up the chain to what your programming choices are or what the structure of your events might be. You might find that parking options becomes a more important item on the agenda than you thought. Might even go over some of the dramaturgical decisions. Who knew? This is a little bugbear of mine, sort of related to that. And this goes back to our thing about how do you talk to the artists. Shakespeare was a crowd pleaser. I hate this idea that art is only art that counts when people are not having a good time. And this idea is out there in the world. I saw it in a BBC interview about a Shakespeare adaptation. One of the artists had the audacity, one of the actors had the audacity to say, I think in a way that's the most important bit, is when people in the audience are bored, because that's when you sort of start thinking deep thoughts. And I'm like, no, this is so wrong. This is so not true. I've heard it out loud from artists and companies that boredom is a literal virtue, that like people having a bad time is part of the point, that if people don't understand, that's how you know you're doing real art. I could not disagree more, And if people want to get all purist about it, you can go back and watch Shakespeare, who everyone lauds as this like, purist artist sort of rendition of human nature on the stage ever to be seen. Is full of crowd pleasing, like give the people what they want, play the hits. It's all, dick jokes and fight scenes. So don't give me this purist nonsense that like it doesn't count unless people are not having a good time. So yeah, that's a bit about, again, it's not just the words that need to be on your audience's terms, it's the actual service. What are they actually getting out of this? And if you don't have a good answer to yourself for why somebody should give up their evening getting a takeaway and watching Netflix in the comfort of their own home and come and do your thing instead, then it doesn't matter how good your copy is. You need to have that fundamental answer crystallized in your head first. Again, it slightly blows my mind that I'm saying this out loud like it's some kind of insight. This feels like 101 to me, but I see it happen so often that it seems like this is a habit that people are in. people are in the habit of not remembering why their audience would want to be there. We've done that one. It's easier to talk to one person. We've talked about what's in it for them. If you go and talk to somebody face to face, you can see when their ears prick up. Let's do a little bit on this one, and then I'll throw it open to you guys again. In Gloucester, there is nothing to do, and art is not boring. So it's very important to understand the context into which you're speaking, right? This isn't just a wordplay thing. This is about the choices that people are making with their lives and their time. And especially at the moment, that is a particularly kind of strained choice. People don't have a lot of disposable time. They don't have a lot of disposable income. It is a big ask to say to somebody, why don't you come and spend your time and your money with us? And I think it's right to recognize that that is a big ask. But if you understand the context into which you're speaking, then hopefully you can come up with a compelling answer to that question. Why should people come and spend their time with you? What service does your arts event offer to them? And in Gloucester, it is a combination of remedying the paucity of options for things to do and some of this like social change stuff that I was talking about. So the reason Strike a Light exists is because the government identified years and years ago a set of cultural cold spots in the UK, and they wanted to try and do something to remedy those, and Gloucester was one of those cold spots. If you Google Gloucester is, the first result on autocomplete is a dump. It takes you to a Guardian article that tells you that Gloucester was stuck in the recession, not the 2008 one, but the 1970s one. There was an audience survey of students. This was quite a lot of students in the city because the University of Gloucestershire is here and in Cheltenham. They surveyed 1,000 students in the city and asked them, what is your favorite thing about Gloucester? And the overwhelming runaway top answer, more than double the next nearest option, was nothing. As in literally nothing. My favorite thing about Gloucester is nothing. My second favorite thing about Gloucester is it's got good transport options, aka ways to get the hell out of here and go somewhere else. Like, this is the context into which we are working is there's nothing to do and I'm bored. And our events should be a really good remedy to that if we're doing our job right. And so that is at the nub of the service that we can offer to people. This is a way to have an enriching experience in a city where you thought that there was nothing exciting happening. But that may not be the same in your context, but you need to have a good answer to that question. What is this providing to the people I want to come to this that they can't get elsewhere, or that is a felt need in their life? We had an event not too long ago that was specifically for like LGBTQ plus audience, and we tried to work out if we needed to provide taxis to and from the venue, because there is still so much of an issue with people's safety, and there's a real concern about if am I going to go to this and put myself in danger, that we needed to ask the question of whether an obstacle was going to be people's transport. Slightly different situation, but the same. I think it's exactly right to be asking those questions. And here's a controversial thing potentially. I think when people are divvying up their marketing budget, they often are just fast tracking straight to like how much goes on print, how much goes on digital, how much goes on this. Like, could part of your promo budget be buses? Like that was a question we had to ask ourselves for that event. Do I need to move some of my money away from Insta reel boosts and spend it on taxis for people instead, because that's actually the bigger service, I suppose. I think, as I keep on saying, it is important to recognize those like practical constraints are a big bit of this. Like, it's easy to be idealistic, but sometimes it's just the hard realities that are interfering with it. I suppose the one encouragement I would give on that front from our experience is there can be more wiggle room. Sometimes it's less scary to do for real than people think it's going to be in advance, right? So sometimes, I mean, we took advantage of COVID in some ways to do this, to take a step back and sort of reevaluate some of the ways that we were working. But things like the event design meeting, that was a new thing that we brought in. And on paper, that feels really scary to people because 9 people around the table for an hour and a half, that's a costly team meeting, right? But the value that we get out of it means that now everyone like eagerly looks forward to those, and it is a really important part of it. So sometimes those entrenched working practices, there's more room to modify them than you may fear. Right, I'm going to rattle on to this last bit and then hopefully we can finish up a bit before 1:30. Last one. So we talked about clarity, we've talked about service. My last really important thing for doing things on other people's terms is ease, making it as simple as possible. And this speaks a little bit to that point of like the travel stuff. That is a big hurdle. And my tool for this, my traditional tool up until quite recently has been a Friends episode title. Is a good way of establishing ease. The Friends episode titles, the ones where, you know, the one where Monica gets her head stuck in a turkey or whatever it is. This is how people will talk about your events amongst themselves. And if you can't distill it down to a Friends episode title style pitch, you're going to struggle. And the reason that's to do with ease is it's about making it so that people can quickly ask this stuff, right? So that they don't have to sort of go through all these elaborate hoops. They can, in 2 seconds, get the hang of, is that something I want to go to or not? And the Friends episode title is a really good discipline for doing that. But in the last couple of years, there's also a digital real world way of putting this to the test I've found, which is TikTok. I've not used this massively with Striker Lite, but I use it in some of my other projects. I'm freelance with a bunch of different people. And TikTok is a quite unnerving way to speed test your pitch because its algorithms are so ruthless and so brutal. And you can make a video and know within 5 minutes whether you've got a compelling pitch or not, based on the ratio of likes you get in the 600 people test audience that TikTok shows it to by default. It's not a foolproof test, but if you want a really quick way to sound out like, have we said something here that people are interested in, or are we boring them? And you don't want to have to go and look at their face in Greg's. TikTok is startlingly good at doing that. But if you're nervous about that for whatever reason, the Friends episode title is not a bad one either. Yeah, just about trying to hone what you're inviting people to down to the smallest version of it you can. And you will know this probably for yourself from the pyramid of Netflix recommendations. And what I mean by that is, if you are recommending to a friend or they are recommending to you a new show that you want to watch, you will do this. You will not even realize that you're doing it. But if you stop and look, you'll follow this remarkably similar pattern. You'll do the Friends episode title. It's the one about, now I'm trying to think of any shows I've watched. It's the one about mogul running Atlantic City in the Victorian times. It's the one about the Murdochs fighting for power of who's going to run their thing. It's the one with whoever in the lead role, you know? It's the one where you'll do a little one-line log line of what this thing is. And then you'll give them a little series of like proof points. So they're like, yeah, maybe I could potentially go for that. And then you'll be like, it's only 20 minutes long, if you're pitching it to my wife, or The Guardian gave it 4.5 stars, or Rolling Stones put it on their top 20 shows of all time list, or it's got so-and-so in it that you saw in this thing and you'll love that, you know. And then they might be like, yeah, okay. And then you'll do the kind of bottom tier of like the write down in the details, you know, oh, we could watch it on Thursday night or whatever, you know, you can get a subscription for £2 off at the moment, whatever it might be. But you'll do this kind of pyramid of like the headline, the persuaders, and then the like nitty-gritty details. And I think the same should go for our events, and it's a good discipline to get the hang of that top bit of the pyramid, especially the easy logline, the 2-second version, the why should I care? It's the service distilled into its smallest form to maximize ease. It's a good skill to get into. It's something I did here at Strike a Light is I made people go around and say what the event was, and then we'd left it behind, we went away, and we came back together 6 hours later at the end of the day, and I tried to get them to say to each other what the show was based on what they said to each other 6 hours ago, and to see if anyone could remember. Right? If you can't remember it with a 6-hour time delay, then you haven't got your pitch down yet. And this is part of, and this partly goes back to the question about with artists and all that sort of stuff, and the programming choices, the seesaw of persuasion. So people basically are always doing this weighing up between the compelling weight of the thing that is being offered to them and the friction causing obstacles, the drag backs, the reasons not to on the other side of that seesaw. Now, if you've got Taylor Swift on one end of your seesaw, then probably the compelling persuasion is going to be so strong that it doesn't really matter what you put on this other end. Are they going to care that there's no rural buses? No way. They're going to like drag themselves over ditch and dale and through the hedges and, you know, crawl there on their hands and knees to make sure that they get into the Eras tour or whatever it's called. You know, so if you've got Taylor Swift, then you don't really need to worry about the frictious obstacles because the persuasion is so heavy. But most of the time, certainly for us, don't know about all of you, but most of the time we don't have Taylor Swift on our persuasion side. And we don't have something that is an instant must-see for people, which means that we have to modify both ends of that seesaw, right? We have to try and make the compelling persuasive bit as heavy as we can. Like there's so many reasons why you don't want to miss this. But also you want to try and lighten or remove as many of those frictious obstacles as possible. And this goes right back to Daniel's point earlier about the parking options. Right. And it may be that sometimes the biggest difference you can make to pitching your event to people who wouldn't normally come to it is less about how much you can big up how brilliant it is, and more about just giving them no reason not to be there. Right. It's right around the corner. It's free. There's food. It's warm. Whatever it might be. It may be that you've got more choice to affect things on this end than on this end. So that's just something to think about. And price obviously is one of those variables, but it's not the only one. And sometimes I think we fall into the trap of thinking that it is. That, well, I've been told I have to charge £7 for this ticket and nobody wants to pay £7, so it's a non-starter, or £25 or £400 or whatever it might be. But I think sometimes that's a bit of a cop-out. Normally price, unless it's really obscene, there's other things that you can modify. So price doesn't have to be a game over thing. Sometimes it is, but it doesn't have to be. But there's also a question there about your organizational priorities. And again, that's where I feel very lucky to work for Strike a Light. Getting people who wouldn't normally get to have these experiences along to our events is basically like our top priority. Is one of our biggest, most important things for the whole organization. And so that means we're able to do things like make a choice a couple of years ago that all of our events are going to be pay what you choose, because we really don't want anybody to not be able to come on that basis. I'm actually a little bit 50-50 sometimes on pay what you choose, because everything you gain in the fact that somebody can be there for £1, you sometimes lose in the fact that they have to think about it, which is not easy. Like sometimes it creates more ease to just say it is this much. But I think the principle of the inclusion that offers is really important, being able to get new people there. Oh, that's a fun question. Related to that, and maybe based on a recent experience, before you dive into all this work, maybe we should have done this first. Are you sure you want these people there? Like, make sure of that first. And again, that might sound dumb, but I've seen it happen. In the world of habituation, are you sure that you and your organization want non-arts attenders attending your arts events, they might do it wrong. They might do it wrong. They might clap when they're not meant to. They might not clap when they are meant to. They might not sit in their seat perfectly still for the whole duration of it. They might shout out. They might make noises. They don't know. They've not been to one of these things before. Anything could happen. It trips me out that that is an obstacle for people, but it does seem to be. And sometimes I think the reason that arts organizations don't get arts attenders to their event is basically because they haven't really gotten over the fact that they don't actually want them to be there. I've seen it happen where we're running an event and it's an outdoor one, and so passers-by want to come. And in all the build up to this, it's all been like, yeah, let's get people off the streets. Let's get like people who would never normally get to have this experience to come along. And then they're there. They turn up to your show. They see it happening. They see the lights. They hear the music. They're excited for this thing. It's in a car park, or it's on a bit of the town they don't normally get to go to. Like, this is a fun thing. What could it be? They want to come in, and then, sorry, we've got no seats because we need to keep these 6 for the company who've already seen it 5 times. Or can't come in because you're making too much noise. Or you can't come in because we're going to have to put you down the front, and then that's not going to look good in our photos for the thing afterwards. Like, that happens, and it offends me, basically. Like, it staggers me. Strategically, what is that decision? You're saying you want to get non-arts attenders there, and then you're literally turning them away. But also it offends me. But there we go. Let's not get too heated about that. But it just goes to show that that is a question that still needs asking. Are you sure you want these people there? People who are coming for the first time, people who don't normally do this, people who might need a bit of extra help to feel comfortable in the space. There are choices there beyond your marketing copy that really, really matter. And just please make sure that you're ready for that as well. I guess I'm partly saying that because in our work in Gloucester, a lot of it is outdoor. And also, Gloucester city centre has a big population of people with like drug and alcohol abuse problems, for example. We had a homeless guy turn up to one of our shows and then leave a donation at the end. Just sort of blows my mind. But so it's going to be even more pronounced, right? There's a high likelihood that when we say non-arts attenders, we don't just mean, you know, somebody who hasn't happened to venture to a West End show before. We mean people who, yeah, don't normally get to go and do anything nice with their time, especially. And that creates a different vibe. And I think it's really important that you are excited for that vibe and not trepidatious about it. That goes alongside holistic access. Let's not just talk about access in terms of like, have we got a wheelchair ramp, but this whole package of like, are we set up to make people feel comfortable and at home and welcome, and like this space is for them regardless of where they're coming from. This goes back to the thing about different possible prioritizations, like the information hierarchy. Are there things that aren't the core of the event itself? Maybe sometimes non-arts attenders won't be coming for the art. Oh my goodness, whisper it, don't tell the artists. They might not actually be there for, you know, the transcendent exploration of the penal system in 1915 or whatever. They might be there because they want to have a nice time with their friends, and things that help provide that service might be more like food or a sense of community, or the music that's playing beforehand, or some social justice stuff that's going to get on. People are going to speak up for stories that normally don't get spoken up for. Maybe even the physical place that it's happening. These are all factors that we have found matter to people who we want to have come along more than they maybe sometimes matter to companies or artists or whatever. So make the most of those things. We quite often put on events where we signal that there's going to be food available afterwards, or snacks, or a chance to sit and have dinner. Yeah, we play up the fact that these are amplifying stories that don't normally get heard, because that can matter to people. We emphasize that this is going to get you into a bit of town that you don't normally get to see. There's lots of things around the happening of an event that can be an important part of the experience for people. All right, last thing, because I really feel like I'm doing too much talking, and I'm sorry. This is a super small one, but I feel like it encapsulates lots of what we've talked about. This is a tiny detail, but it is a bugbear of mine. Surprises are on your terms. If you want to do things on other people's terms, a surprise, a keeping it hidden, a like, let's not show them beforehand. That is not for your non-arts attendant, new audience, new people terms. That is not for their benefit. That is squarely for your benefit or the artist's benefit. And what this plays out of in terms of marketing is things like not putting anything meaningful in the trailer. Drives me absolutely wild. Well, we can't show them the show, then they'll have seen the show and they won't come to the show. That is not how people work. People go specifically to see things that they have already seen, especially if you go to a gig now, especially if somebody who's like trending on socials or whatever, it's wild. People are like not interested for 90% of it. And then the 2-second clip of the audio that they've heard comes on and they go absolutely wild for it for that 5 seconds of bit that they are familiar with. And then they go back to their disinterest. This idea that like you have to keep it opaque from people in order to preserve the artistic purity or whatever is, I think it's really, really toxic. I really hate it. Surprises, secrets, opacity, that's for your benefit, not for your benefit. And it is the opposite of ease. That's why it's my takeaway on that one. It's the opposite of removing frictious. It's literally putting them in people's way. It goes back to that thing of like, oh, art's only art when it's boring. Like, stop putting obstacles in people's way if you want them to be there. Maybe you don't want them to be there. Oh, right. Anyway, I'm getting full ranty soapbox now, so I'm going to stop. Often I force the people that are working with me, bless them, to endure my Sankey diagrams, which is like a route to market map where we break out all the strands of where we think we can get people to come to this from, right? So we'll start with, we need to get 120 people there on that Thursday night. I think we can get 30 from our core audience and 30 from local schools, and then 10 might come from this kind of cohort and 20 might come from down here. And so we'll break out those strands and then do exactly as you're saying, try and curate a tailored pitch to each of those kind of far end of the Sankey diagram. But again, that goes back to that thing of who, because often it will work so much better if that comes from Halima than from me, for example. Like one of our best marketing channels is like Halima WhatsApping somebody. But that obviously will be totally different than the pretty MailChimp that we send out to our core audience or whatever. So yeah, I think that is really key. Well, look, we've got a couple of minutes left. If there's anything else that like I should have covered and I've neglected to, or there's anything that people particularly want to hear about. Otherwise, I will leave you with my free headlines and my free tools. All right. People are always so like politely quiet on Zooms. Oh, okay. Hold on. There's a comment in the chat. One of the main things apparent to me are that work needs to engage and go into communities rather than just half-heartedly hoping that these communities will come with outreach. 100%. Could not agree more. Yeah, a lot of this is about priorities and effort. Like most marketing, in my experience, is not rocket science. There's no secret silver bullets. Like you can try and gamify hacking the TikTok trend and like see if you can ride the wave to 650,000 views or whatever. You don't need 650,000 views. You've got 400 tickets to sell, right? You need 4,000 views and a good conversion rate. And yeah, this thing, I think, again, habits, people often fall into the habit of doing the activities that look like marketing, and they haven't stepped back to ask if that is actually the priority work that is going to speak to the people you want to speak to. And yeah, Jack, it might be about designing specific programming design to do that too. I think there's definitely a big place for that. Again, with our community producers, we get them to co-program or co-create their own events through the year, so that there are things specifically that they're originating, which are sort of tailor-made to reach people who wouldn't normally come to our events. But I would also say there is almost always going to be a compelling reason on the end of that seesaw for somebody to come to a thing. Like if there isn't, I feel like, back to my Shakespeare was a crowd pleaser point, if there is nothing compelling to new audiences in this end of the seesaw, then something's gone quite wrong somewhere in the making of the art or the programming. And there will almost always be some truly good reason why somebody should want to come and spend their time with that. The trick there is having the time to work out what it is, because sometimes it might be quite different for your audience than what you might first expect. But yeah, the stronger you can make that compulsion, the better, obviously. Thanks so much for giving up a big chunk of your time this morning and listening to me basically just rant before I leave. That was very cathartic for me. I hope there's been some useful stuff in there. I will send this recording and a screenshot of screenshot. I'm so digital. It's just a photo, Ben. It's a wall. I'll send around this recording and a photo of this wall and a link to the tools that I've talked about. And yeah, good luck, everybody. Nice to see you all. Have a good one.